He's the former president and publisher of the Sun Herald, and now he's on the radio. Welcome to Coast Vue with Ricky Mathews on SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1.
I hope you're having a great day. Welcome to Coast Vue. This is a show that celebrates the men and women who are working so hard to make coastal Mississippi a great place to live, work, and play. Today we have a super special guest. We're having a Coast Vue session with Gerald Blessey, the former mayor of Biloxi. How you doing, Gerald?
Doing great.
Thanks for joining me in the studio.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. Hey, did you have an opportunity to watch the conversation with Tim and Dean Holloman about voice?
I did. It was wonderful.
What? Tell me a quick memory about voice.
God, I loved him, and he was a mentor and such a great person. But you know, what I remember most is the humor, because he would interject humor and lighten.
Yeah.
In very tense situations.
They told so many cool stories.
Yeah.
This show has been a real gift to me because it's given me an opportunity to shed the light on leaders who have made a substantial contribution to coastal Mississippi. In some cases, set the record straight. In other cases, reflect on the history that at times was difficult. But what I've found is that there have been all kinds of challenges in the history of our coast. And always there are resilient leaders that rise above all of those challenges and become incredibly important to our coast. We can learn things from them. You know, you're one of those people. I've really been looking forward to having this conversation because it really does give us a chance to not only talk about the mark that you've already made in coastal Mississippi, which are substantial, but it gives us an opportunity to talk about what's yet to come, because I know you're working on so many different things. So I look at you this way. You're a prominent lawyer. You're smart as hell. You're one of the smartest people I know. Your wife Paige and you devour books for breakfast. I remember once I went into your house and
she's my inspiration. Most of my good ideas come from Paige.
Well, I can see it. She's extraordinarily well read, as you are. I remember going into your office or something at your house once many years ago and seeing just all these books of different. I mean, how do you decide what you're going to read?
Well, I try to read more than one thing at a time. It's kind of fun, you know.
Yeah, I can only imagine. You would make me feel very inferior if I were to ask you how many books you're reading now. You're a Vietnam veteran. You're a visionary. You're someone who's made, as I said a minute ago, really substantial contributions to coastal Mississippi. And what I want to do today is I want to talk about that. I want to give people a sense of sort of who you are and where you come from. First, I think your journey's been incredible. Tell me about growing up in Biloxi.
It was a wonderful time. I mean, we grew up in East Biloxi. My parents never finished high school, but my dad was a mailman. And the days when they walked the route. And in the summertime, one of my favorite things was to walk the route with him. And his route was in East Biloxi, and about half of it was black Americans and half white. He got to know people. He did this for 30 years, so they knew him very well. And I got to learn a lot about just day-to-day life of all kinds of people and how friendly they were. I mean, just together. And it was a walkable community. And I didn't own a car until I was in the Army. Couldn't afford a car until I was in the Army, but you could walk everywhere. To walk to the picture show, walk to church, walk to school. It was just, and the neighborhoods were wonderful. I mean, my oldest best friends are the Marvers were next door. Bugs Marver were born on the same day.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So were you always studious?
Well, you know, my parents valued education so much. They were children of the Depression. They didn't finish high school. They went to work. But that was the number one value, that, and, you know, always tell the truth.
Yeah.
Education was it, you know. And
so you were, so education was part of the principles that your parents taught you, but you had to have a good brain to begin with. Did you know early on that you were a pretty smart kid?
I still don't think I'm really any smarter than anyone else. I've just been lucky to get a good education and have the opportunity, you know. I mean, I really believe that everybody's born with the equipment to do what geniuses do. There's some luck involved, but it's really a matter of attitude.
Mm-hmm. So you went to University of Mississippi. Tell about that part of your life.
Well, I I'd played music when I had a rock and roll band when I was 15, the Rock and Rebels, which was a pretty popular band around the coast. I got to know a lot of people, and so I saved some money there, and I had a scholarship, an academic scholarship. But it was a new world, and I got active in the civil rights movement as a student, Young Democrats. It was a very exciting time, 1960, and on through 66, and I stayed for law school. So Ole Miss was a formative year because, period, it was a crucible. I mean, it was a great leadership crucible. I mean, some of my oldest and best friends through the years I met at Ole Miss. Thad Cochran, Trent Lott, Haley Barber. I actually taught Haley. I was an instructor in law school, and Haley was
wow.
a freshman in the state and local government class, you know, in those days, graduate students and teach. But most of all, it was, you had in the law school, we had these great professors, Josh Morris, Joel Blass, so many people that had Coast ties. I look back on Ole Miss as being the door that opened.
Joel Blass was our attorney at the Sun Herald for a very long period of time. Your daughter Mary actually did a documentary about a very substantial part of Ole Miss's history while you were there. Just give this is not about that, but just kind of give the overview of what that was about.
Well, I don't want to steal the thunder. Mary's documentary is about Robert Kennedy's historic speech in 1966, brought to Ole Miss by the Law School Speakers Bureau, which was concocted by my dear friend Cleveland Donald, the second African American that went to Ole Miss. He and I kind of put together this scheme to get around the speaker band. There was a band. You couldn't invite anybody from off campus to speak about anything unless you had permission from the higher ups. And anyway, the story is wonderfully told, and it was Robert Kennedy's exposing Ross Barnett's duplicity that led up to the riots and really literally caused the riots. It's going to be premiered on March 22nd at the Oxford Film Festival. So, and hopefully it'll come out on PBS or something.
I saw it. there's a little segment on a promotion segment on YouTube, and you can tell already it's going to be super special.
Yeah.
Have you seen? I'm sure you've seen it more than once. You're in it. In it, you actually say justice is only done when truth is the victor.
Yeah.
And that certainly in the aftermath of the James Meredith situation and the core of the civil rights history of Mississippi, that is certainly true. And just in every facet of your life as a lawyer, that's been true as well. So you went to Ole Miss Law School, and tell about that transition, and then ultimately you went to Vietnam. So tell about that role as well.
Well, I was in Army ROTC, graduated 64. Nothing was really happening, so I went straight into law school and finished in 2 years. By that time, 66, the September 66, it was pretty hot, and so I went to infantry school at Combat Platoon Leader School at Fort Benning, and then intelligence school and Vietnamese language school, and then Vietnam for 13 months. It was.
So when you say Vietnamese language school, what is Vietnamese language school?
Well, the Army school, it's a crash course in learning the Vietnamese language, and so when I got there, I ended up being the head of a 30-man unit, 15 Americans, 15 Vietnamese, were all bilingual. They knew English better than we knew Vietnamese. And
it's a difficult language to learn.
For me, it was extremely hard, and it's a beautiful language. And of course, it's tonal and it's kind of musical.
I had a little bit of an experience with it when I led the oil recovery efforts. For the Governor's Commission in Alabama. We had a public meeting down in Bala Battery. And I think SOS boat people were involved in the discussion. They said, well, we need to get some Vietnamese interpreters. I said, well, okay, we'll write down Vietnamese interpreter. And they said, no, you don't understand. We need Vietnamese interpreter. We need Cambodian interpreter. I did not realize that there were so many different languages involved. Yeah. Did you have to learn the different dialects?
Well, there were two basic dialects, the North and the South. We tried to pick up both. We relied heavily, of course, on our counterparts. The Vietnamese who would go with us. We had 2-man and 4-man teams. We'd go out with the land units, the 101st, 82nd Airborne, Special Forces, and kind of get out with the line companies. And But yeah, it was. It's a tough language. I love the Vietnamese people. They're just like people everywhere. And out in the countryside, they want the same things we want. Education for their kids, food to eat, healthcare.
I have a friend of mine whose son went to Cambodia as part of a mission, and he's still there today. He fell in love with the country, and he's been there for many years. Actually, he's a journalist in Cambodia.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's an amazing place. Yeah. So what we're going to do when we come back from the break, I want to really learn more about what you did while you were in Vietnam, and what was that experience like? How did it impact you? Then you came back and you went to Harvard, and you continued your education, and you continued to build the best version of yourself, and all these experiences kept becoming part of who you are today. So when we come back, we're going to continue that conversation with Gerald Blessey, the former mayor of Biloxi and a prominent lawyer here along the coast, involved in the Bonnie Carey Spillway issue that we'll talk about at the very end. So we'll see you after this break.
Subscribe for free to the Coast Vue podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Coast Vue with Ricky Mathews on SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1.
Welcome back. I'm so pleased to be having this conversation today with Gerald Blessey, someone I've looked up to for most of my career. I told him during just before the show started that I saw him give a speech once. He was the mayor of Biloxi. He was at a chamber event in Gulfport. At the time, maybe the leaders got along to some extent, but people, there was a lot of competition between Biloxi and Gulfport. I remember hearing him and thinking, goodness gracious, the vision that he is clearly communicating. I was in my late 20s as an employee at the Sun Herald at the time, and I remember thinking to myself that one day I'm going to try to touch people in that way, the same way that you touched me that day. It was just incredible. What a visionary you've been for all of your career. Anyway, where we left it off, you were in Vietnam. So let's continue the conversation. Take it from there.
I love the Army. I mean, not the killing part, but the camaraderie in the sense of common purpose, leadership. Learned a lot about leading men. I was 25 years old, as the oldest guy in my unit, and people look up to you, so you're responsible, and I learned that we went out in the field a lot for our little teams. So as soon as I got off a helicopter, I could almost instantly tell whether that unit was well led or not, based on the morale of the guys. And the great leaders were not, the dictator type leaders. They're the ones that would really work with the men and share, good communication, and be willing to do everything they do, So that was great lessons. I also learned, because I was in intelligence, and I'd go back to base camp and give reports, that sometimes you have to speak truth to power. What was happening after Tet, was there for the Tet offensive. I was asked to give a report to this Brigadier General, who's a G2 for the Corps Commander, Major General. And they wanted to know, after Tet, we had a great military victory, but they wanted statistics on how the North Vietnamese were, declining and everything. And we'd been out in the field, and I wrote a report. I said, well, statistically, they have less training, they're younger, but they're replacing the ones that we capture or kill faster than we do it. And so their esprit de corps is very good. So long story short, I made that report. It was kind of subjective and statistical. And the brigadier said, I can't use that. That's not what they want to hear in D.C. You got to change your report. I said, I'm not going to do that. He said, well, I'll give you an order to change it. I said, well, you can order me, but I'm just a citizen soldier. I'm not a career guy. I'm doing my duty. And he said, well, you can be court-martialed. I said, well, go ahead. When I get home, my dad will talk to Senator Stennis. Well, Senator Stennis didn't know my dad from Adam. He was just a mailman. But the brigadier said, well, don't get so upset, young man. He took my report, he threw it in the shredder, and that was the end of that. But you see, they were not telling the truth all the way to, it was what Robert McNamara and them wanted to hear, instead of what was really happening on the ground. We won the military victory, but we lost the psychological war.
Amazing. And you carry those learnings with you probably still to this day.
Yeah.
It's just so important to seek the truth.
Yeah.
So you came back, and what was the first thing you did when you got back to the States?
Well, I taught at Ole Miss for a year. Josh Morris asked me to come back, and then I got a fellowship to Harvard for a master's degree.
And Josh was the second African-American student at the law.
No, Josh was the dean of the law school.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
Cleve McDonald's the second undergrad.
Okay, that's right. There you go.
And Cleveland by that time had gone on to get a PhD in history. He became the first African-American head of the African-American studies at Ole Miss. He's dead now, but a great guy from Jackson.
Yeah.
So Josh and I went to Harvard on a fellowship, and I was going to come back to teach, but 1970 was a very tumultuous year across America and then in Mississippi again, and Josh had left to go to Florida State. So I decided to come home and change the world by running for the legislature and got elected at 29 in the House of Representatives.
Where did Harvard fit in?
Well, Harvard was very enlightening. You know, it was, I'll tell you this, the top 20% at Ole Miss, faculty and students are just as good as anybody at Harvard, except they're all that way at Harvard.
Yeah.
So it was a very exciting thing. I loved it. I learned a great deal, had great teachers. And but I really wanted to come home. Mississippi, God love it, is a wonderful place to live, but it has so many challenges. And I just felt like I'd been blessed to get this education, and so, you know, it's a duty to come home. And so it's interesting things like I heard Ralph Nader give a speech at Harvard, which is one of those offline things. And he talked about sensory perception, how important it is. You know, we learn things by what we see and feel, but abstract reasoning is harder. So the example is, you know, if you woke up tomorrow morning and air pollution were red paint on your windshield, by that afternoon, everybody in America would have the Congress change the law and get rid of the air pollution.
Mm-hmm.
But air pollution is actually like that, but you have to have some abstract reasoning. The law has to be explained. And so really explaining the law in common sense ways and developing better laws in common sense ways really begins with the people.
And you came back, got elected, and now you're in a position where you can actually start doing that, actually. So
right.
What did you take away from that?
You know, you got to marry thought with action. I mean, good ideas are a dime a dozen. Putting them into implementation and acting on them, making a law and then implementing the law in a fair and just way, that's a lot harder.
Did the process frustrate you? How slow it moved?
I was going broke by the time I was there for 10 years, and you know, a sole practitioner, you can't commute to Jackson very easily from Biloxi. So the longer you stay, the more you do. And I was going broke, so I thought, well, I loved it, but it was slow to change things. Changing the law and changing culture for the better is slow and tedious in the legislature. So I decided I'd run for mayor in 1981 in my third term and be closer to home, and I thought maybe I could practice part-time, which was an illusion.
And so what happened?
So then I ran for mayor in 1981 and got elected at 39 to the first change the form of government to the mayor-council form from the commission form, and it was an exciting time.
So what's important to the conversation is the economic situation that you faced.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the state of affairs economically when you became mayor.
Well, Biloxi was in a steep decline because of tourism going down. Interstate 10 had opened to Destin, and all the Louisiana people were just passing us by. So we needed to do something new. So we got to thinking about what we could do. At Harvard, I had visited and learned from the Quincy Market had just been opened up, the Festival Marketplace, which James Rouse and the great developer that did Baltimore and so forth. So I took 35 civic leaders and the press and the city council, those that would go, Chamber of Commerce, for 4 days to Charleston and Baltimore to look at their waterfronts. We're a waterfront city. Biloxi has 150 miles of waterfront when you count the bay and the rivers. And it had been devastated by Camille. We still hadn't recovered. And then we're losing our tourism. The 3 largest hotels went bankrupt. Sales tax was in decline. So, and Joe Riley, the great mayor of Charleston, was in his second term there. We were colleagues, and looked at things like, I said, Joe, how are y'all doing all this stuff? He said, tax increment financing. I said, what is that? And so he gave me the South Carolina law. I came home and struck out South Carolina and put in Mississippi, and anyway, we got that passed.
But did you just get it passed the first time we'd ever used TIFs, ever?
That's right. And we came home with a plan. 15 months, we did a plan based on what the people really think can make the difference, and experts helping. And so that's the Biloxi waterfront of 1985 that led to the Point Cadet development, that led to the Europa Star, and opened up gambling.
So what a fascinating story. It was also a difficult time.
Yeah.
Tell me just a little bit about that.
Well, government is complicated, and to do it well, there's a lot of moving parts. So we were using federal money to develop the Point Cadet project. We spent about $2.8 million, I think, buying land. Anyway, long story short, there's some folks who thought there was something wrong with the way we were doing. I got indicted, got acquitted later. But in the meantime, we needed to keep doing our job. And so,
Gerald, what's amazing to me about that, and you go back and look at the history of this, is that justice did prevail, thank goodness. It was unfortunate that you had to fight to find the truth in that, but you did. What's amazing to me, though, is that while that was going on, you were still focused on getting something like, and then ultimately the Europa Star. That moment in Biloxi's history was transformational from a historical perspective in terms of what ended up happening in this town. So what I want to do when we come back from the break, I want to talk about how that happened. How did there were injunctions involved and potential laws involved. In the early days, you had to figure out what was going to be the path that's going to get us to where we could have that boat that could give us the economic shot in the arm that the city needed. And you accomplished that in the midst of all the other things that were happening, which is one of the reasons why I've always been so, not just impressed, but so inspired by you as a leader, that you could stand above all the difficulties and stay focused on the goal. And you reached the goal. And we're going to come back after the break and talk about that. This is Gerald Blessey, the former mayor of Biloxi, and enjoying the conversation, and we'll see you after this break.
SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1 on Twitter at SuperTalk MSGC.
He's the former president and publisher of the Sun Herald, and now he's on the radio. Welcome to Coast Vue with Ricky Mathews on SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1.
Welcome back to Coast Vue. I'm so honored to have Gerald Blessey with me today. I mean, what an incredible coast leader he has been. I want to go back though. You just kind of sped right over it, but as it relates to the Europa Star, man, there was a lot going on to pull that off. Tell kind of briefly that story.
Well, because federal law allows you to gamble in federal waters, international waters, and federal waters. So, Europa Star was the first legal gambling in Mississippi. It had a dock, though, at the state port, our port in the state, and so we had to get an injunction to say that the federal law prevailed. And so for the winter of 88, 89, you had a demonstration that this would work. The small mom and pop hotels all of a sudden went from 10% occupancy to 50% occupancy. Well, the legislature came the first year. We needed to make the law permanent. You couldn't just stay with an injunction forever. And it passed the House that first year, and it failed in the Senate. So the next year, by that time, the success of the Pride of Mississippi and the law was allowed to go into state waters. It was a progression. Once we opened the door, the leadership of the state and local realized this was an opportunity,
I think until you and I had this conversation, you didn't fully appreciate how the Europa Star impacted Terry and Rick And the conversation I had with them, if you haven't seen the Rick Carter and Terry Green conversation, you should go take a look at it. It's a fascinating discussion. Yeah. But they were doing business in Texas, and they were launching a new concept restaurant. They were about to open a second one. The economy was softer because of the energy situation. Terry says to Rick, one of my partners said, we got to have slot machines. Rick had heard about the Europa Star. The next day, they come and get on the Europa Star, and the rest is history. They go do a deal with the Port of Gulfport. Cy Red reads a little article that sort of introduces him to Rick and Terry, and then, today
that was big, but there was another big event. Yeah. Because remember, the first referendum failed in Harrison County, and so we had to go through a second. We had the taxpayers and majority rule. It was Page's idea, and Biloxi had voted for it, but Gulfport had not.
Had not, right.
And so we tried to get an injunction saying, well, Biloxi is a second judicial district and it's a separate county and we should be allowed to go ahead. And then James Thomas, the judge, said, I'll take this under advisement while y'all try to get together. We had a second referendum and it passed so that you could be dockside.
Right.
That was the key.
Yes.
Even for Rick and Terry, the key was to be able to be dockside. And of course, that was the blossoming of the Isle of Capri, et cetera.
It was an incredible progression. So what they had to do is go out to international waters, and then they got the Gaming Control Act allowed them to be gaming on the way to federal waters. In the meantime, you guys were focused on getting at least a court order or some injunction that would enable you to actually not have to be in federal waters, but actually stay in the shallow waters.
We had done that earlier.
Yeah.
But really, by the third year, it was working on the dock side.
All about the dock side.
Dock side, right.
So let's fast forward. As you continue to evolve as a leader in the community, what are some, this is prior to Hurricane Katrina hitting. Tell me about the journey that you were on after you weren't mayor anymore.
Well,
what was next?
Because of my trials, I basically had to start all over again at 50 years old with no money and very few clients. And it took a while. Because it's just hard to start again. I had devoted so much time to being mayor, and the economy, was picking up, but it was doing pretty well right up to Katrina, and so I was coming together again as a sole practitioner, represented a number of the new gaming establishments and Tidelands stuff, so. I think the community itself, of course, we were still trying to recover, literally, from Hurricane Camille when Katrina hit.
Yeah.
And so that was the great turning point.
So Katrina hits. You get called again into public service. You become a member of the Governor's Commission with many of us. And your area of interest was one of the really important areas of interest, land use. Tell why that was so important.
Well, cities are ecosystems, towns and cities and so forth. You have a lot of moving parts, so just like natural ecosystems. You have housing and jobs and economic development and social equality and all these education, all these elements. But the key, you've got housing was wiped out by Katrina. We lost 60,000 homes, as you know. And so we really needed to put together the housing as the main element to get the jobs back, and vice versa, jobs. They promote each other.
So you were involved in the development of the Renaissance Corporation?
Well, I wrote that in the report, the commission report. I wrote about what we needed. Jim Barksdale said, what's the boldest idea that would be transformational in each area? And so I said we do the Renaissance Corporation, which would be a perpetual fund for affordable housing, and then recapture that money, which they're still doing, by the way, very wonderfully.
Yes.
Tim LaRosa and her group. And then now it's being invested in small business loans and so forth. But they go together, fit together. It's really critical that we do that. So we formed the Renaissance Corporation. That's right.
And then along the way, there were some difficulties in terms of the housing sector. There were, first of all, so many different entities involved in the conversation. The governor asked you to be, I think initially it was called the housing czar, but you didn't like that phrase. But Governor Barber asked you to come back into the commission in a very significant way, to start to listen and bring the sides together. Tell about that part of the journey.
Gulf Coast Housing Director, technically, it was kind of like the senior advisor to, we had $2 billion worth of the $5 billion going into housing, and it was lagging at that third year. So it was really a matter of encouraging all the communities to work together. You had zoning issues. We had the Katrina cottages. A lot of people thought they didn't look good, and they were wonderful for the people who were using them. And so it was really a matter of trying to orchestrate everyone working together for the common cause. We have 15 governments on the Gulf Coast,
So how long did you do that?
4 years.
4 years. And it was a heavy-duty lift.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the outcome of it all?
Oh, I think the housing was wonderfully successful. The economic development side, which wasn't in my purview, but which we tried to work together, wasn't as successful. It's harder to do economic development, I think.
I think, especially in the aftermath of the storm, you had the mortgage loan issue. You had a lot of condominiums and other projects. Insurance was the biggest of them all. Yeah. It created just significant challenges for us, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
So you left the housing. What I know he wanted to call it the housing czar. You called it the Gulf Coast
Housing Director.
Housing Director. That sounds tame. So you left that. So what did you do after that? Back into private practice?
Back into private practice. And of course, I did have some clients as housing director. It was supposed to be half-time. So I did 40 hours of that and 40 hours. So Tradition was one of my major clients, Joe Canizaro's project up in Harrison County that is now doing wonderfully on Highway 67, William Carey University, the nursing school for community college, et cetera. So that's been a major
St. Patrick's High School.
And then when Fofo got elected, he asked me to come back as city attorney for a couple of years, and I'm now still special counsel. Peter, everybody's a city attorney now. We work together on helping on various things and some litigation, but so it's really been a very active practice since then.
Actually, what I want to do when we come back from the break, I actually want to talk about, it's interesting that as mayor, you focused on the waterfront, and now with Fofo, you're back focused on the waterfront. It's got to be like...
It's wonderful. Fofo is a visionary, and so we work so well together.
He is, yeah. I want to, our conversation was just so dynamic.
Yeah.
He's so smart.
Yeah.
And people who know him know that, but people who don't know him don't really know that. And he gave me an opportunity to really explore how he thinks. Yeah. And, he's really gifted. And we're very lucky. His capacity, he's smart. He's able to get his head around. He made a living writing computer programs, solving very complicated problems.
I gave him one of his first jobs,
Did you?
Yeah, to computerize the city. He mentioned it on your show.
Oh, of course. You were the mayor. Right.
Here was an opportunity to help stimulate a homegrown business, and so he digitized our books, and they still use it.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
The rest is incredible what that opened up for him in terms of opportunity.
Yeah.
Led to other cities, and then ultimately, writing the programs for, food programs for...
Which proves you can do it right here in Biloxi, Mississippi.
First high-tech company in the history of Biloxi.
That's right.
And he said at the time he didn't know that term, and he didn't know what an entrepreneur was. But he does now. What an incredible story. Yeah. But it's so exciting to see that you guys have sort of going full circle now as it relates to the waterfront. So when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about the waterfront and the opportunities ahead. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit about the Bonnie Carey Spillway, because you're engaged in that as well. And I think that's a really, really important part of the coast's future. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll be back with Gerald Blessey, former mayor of the city of Biloxi, after this break.
Also listen live to SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1 on your Amazon Alexa devices. Once you've enabled the skill, just say, Alexa, open SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast.
His love for the coast is why he's here. It's Coast Vue with Ricky Mathews on SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1.
Welcome back to Coast Vue. It's great to have you back. And we've got Gerald Blessey, the former mayor of the city of Biloxi. Man, I'm looking at this list of accomplishments when you were mayor, and even when you weren't mayor, the contributions to the city. For example, appointed the first African-American chief of police, first African-American department head. You founded the Maritime and Seafood Industry Museum. You and your wife, Paige, founded the Biloxi Schooner Project that led to the schooners that we're enjoying today. Established Biloxi Regional Medical Center, built Town Green, the Biloxi Natatorium. The list goes on and on. But of that list, what sticks out to you?
Bringing African Americans into management. Tommy Moffitt did a great job as chief of police. It was so important. 20% of our population, they're essential to our community. They're wonderful people. So that's important, I think, in every government.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was a great accomplishment. He was a terrific police chief. He really was. Yeah. So you come back full circle. You're back focused on the waterfront. Mm-hmm. How excited are you about this?
Well, it's wonderful to be working with FOFO. We share the same heritage and legacy with seafood. The waterfront of Biloxi is our front door, the seascape, this wonderful place we live. I mean, it's our future and our past, the best of our past, the best of our future. And it's a great economic development opportunity, and he's very creative, so I love working with him.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely see that. So what about the future? What do you see in the future?
I think there's a great challenge for the coast as there is for all of Mississippi. We've got to get off the bottom of the economic plateau. We've got a lot of heroic good things going on, but we really need to invest this BP economic damages money and others into strategic investments. What I would like to see, for instance, would be, give Mary Graham at the community college $200 or $300 million and form a 4-year university at JD. How about that? Or help William Carey do the medical school at the medical complex at Tradition. I'm biased about Tradition.
Right, yeah.
But let's do transformational economic development things playing to our strengths. What we have here is wonderful. It's a great place to live. We need better jobs. To get millennials here, you got to have jobs.
Well, the community college system in Mississippi to begin with is one of the best in the country.
Yeah.
So, I'd not heard that idea before, but that's a bold idea. It's one that we should strongly consider. The role they play in jobs development and helping move this ball forward is really important.
Right.
I've spent time with Anthony Wilson and Ashley Edwards from the Business Council, and the strategic planning that's happening there to make sure that the BP money is spent in a way that is bold and has a great return on investment and not just project oriented. How important is that?
Extremely important. And another one would be high-speed broadband. C-Spire is coming in here now. Affordable high-speed broadband for everybody. If you want millennials to live in the downtowns, their apartments got to have 1 gigabit up and down affordable, like they do in Chattanooga and Lake Charles and Lafayette, so forth. So, we've got to be bold in our investment. We also have to recognize their great strength. Our downtowns, for instance, Biloxi and Ocean Springs. Ocean Springs and Gulfport, luckily didn't have urban renewal. We did. That was one of the great terrible things after Camille. But restoring the downtown is very important. That's a plan that Paige and I helped FOFO and SMPDD put together. Now we've opened up Howard Avenue, a great place to live and work. We need more housing downtown.
Right, so the creative class can live, work, and play in the same area. Yeah. Hey, listen, you've been involved. You've been brought into the Bonnie Carey Spillway deal. We're actually going to bring you back and just have a conversation about that because it's going to take a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of focus. Mississippi needs great representation. We need to all be together on this thing. Right. But in a nutshell, what do you think about the situation where we are today?
It's the greatest challenge of our time.
I agree.
And not just for the Gulf Coast, but for all of the Mississippi River Valley, 31 states. We've got to do something to stop. The algae bloom last summer was devastating. It could happen again and again. So FOFO asked me to put together a coalition of local governments, cities, and counties. The Mississippi Sound Coalition is formed. We're active now. We're trying to get a new act called the Mississippi Sound and Lake Pontchartrain Protection Act adopted in Congress to give Mississippi a voice and give the coast a voice.
Yes.
We got some pretty smart people here. We have some great scientists at USM and Gulf Coast Research Lab and DMR. Let's us sit at the table and show that there's a better way than putting this toxic stuff into.
Well, and also it's not a situation where it's us against Louisiana. The way you're setting this up is that us and Louisiana can work together to find a solution for this problem.
We have a common cause and common purpose. It's really a national problem, though, and it needs a national solution. We need a Marshall Plan for the whole Mississippi River Valley to replumb the Mississippi River and change how it works. That's very...
Back in the 80s, I was on the Gulf of Mexico Program Committee, and we knew then we had problems. We knew then that there were dead zones off the mouth of the Mississippi River. But the rise in floods and the frequency of having to open the spillway and not having really good backup plans for that inevitability, and the fact that they really weren't studying the environmental impact on the Mississippi Sound, I'm glad we're on the case. So, Gerald, we're coming to the end of our time together. Like I said, it's impossible to get into everything. But, I want to thank you for your leadership in coastal Mississippi. And at a time in your life when you probably could just, sit back and read some books and, sip on a glass of wine and enjoy, your life. You're in here swinging hard still. We get the benefit of your passion and your vision, your experience, and your brains. And that's an exciting thing for me to see, and I'm sure other people will see that as well when they watch this conversation. So, without any further ado, I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. I enjoyed it.
It's been a pleasure. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.